Hello once again, everyone. So, I had special requests from my people to go over just some basic good longsword combos using pure fundamentals. So really think of this as just, these are things that definitely work. And we're also going to talk about it in the context of both modern, all the gear on sparring, and also effectual sparring. So for this, Randy's helped me out, and Randy's in a lot less gear because I'm going to be showing kind of the difference between the two, but we are using stills for this. But either way, really what this comes about from is when you're learning all these different techniques, it can be a little bit overwhelming, or sometimes it can be almost too compartmentalized. So what I mean by that is, especially if you're doing something like the German system, you learn all these Meisterhau, but you don't really spend a whole lot of time talking about just Oberhau or Unterhau or anything that's like that. If it's talking about, Fiore, again, we have some plays, but most of the time people forget about just cut a good fendenti, and if they parry, cut another good fendenti, and things like that. So really, these are meant to be non-stylistic and much more in regards to just generally protecting your openings and using the properties of the weapon. So let's start off nice and basic. Kind of the most easy one that you're going to be coming across is two attacks coming in. So you have offensive and defensive combos. We're going to go ahead and start with the defensive one, then we'll start with an offensive one. We'll alternate like that. So, Fencer's first trick. He cuts on one side, causing you to block. He cuts on the other side, and is hoping to strike. There's a couple different ways of dealing with this. My advice would be you're going to have to suppress one versus the other, but depending upon what you get on the first one, you'll tell whether or not you need to follow with the second. So, the big mistake people make is that when this first one comes out, they just kind of oblige it, and I want to talk about this in more detail when we do the offensive combo, but a lot of the time, Fencer A there knows that I'm going to try and parry this, so he doesn't put a whole lot into this, and in turn I don't put a whole lot into this, and this is basically wasted. As such, make sure that your parries are active. That doesn't mean put more force into them. That just means if he's swinging, I'm trying to change the game on him, especially if he's not really coming at me all that much. I just gained a lot of angle, I gained a lot more presence, and I got more out of my parry than he did out of his first cut. But either way, from this position you have a couple different options. Of course, the most immediate option would be to just go ahead and dive in with a point of some kind, but if we're talking effectual and we're not allowed to thrust, how do you get around this? You deliver a cut instead. So, I've set myself up nice and strong. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my pommel up and just go ahead and chop to the top of his head. Now, sometimes you'll end up catching with the cross guard. That's okay. It'll still effectively land on him. But I'll show that one a little smoother. Nice, quick little chop. And I'm not doing anything fancy with my thumb grip here. All I'm doing is just lifting the pommel, and naturally that chop will kind of just go down on the top of the head. It's just a 12-6. Very simple, very effective. And like I said, if you are not worried about going off effectual rules, just do a wind instead. Another important thing to remember, probably should have mentioned this first, but another important thing to remember is that regardless of system, there's still the concept of the drei Wunde, the three wounders. Any action can be a cut, a thrust, or a slice. Now, some are better in some situations, like for example that one. I get this good parry. The best solution would be the thrust. Since I'm this close, I'm all good. But that doesn't mean that the cut is impossible. Cut's still possible. Heck, the slice is possible from there. But one is more favored. But depending upon what rules you're playing under, you may need to choose. And that's really the mark of the better fencer. Once you understand those three, it's very easy to go, okay, this tool wounds with this. How do I use it with this? But anyway, so that's our first kind of option. You just parry, pop, or parry, thrust. Very simple, mostly focused on you getting out to the side. Now let's talk about if he follows up with a secondary cut. So he cuts. I get parry, but now he's coming around. We have two options. I can either turn to catch, or I can drop to catch. Now, I know especially for those of you who are in my more beginner classes or my open classes, you're going to be inclined to try and do the bogan. So we'll go over that first. This is a combo that I used to use all the time. I call it wall, roof, hit, right? Basically what you're going to do is you've got your first parry, that's your wall, right? Then as they come around, and I recommend you only use this against people who really spring out wide around you, you're going to drop your tip and step up with your left leg as you create a slanted roof between you and them. I tend to move into the thumb grip as I do this, but it's not required. From there, I'm just going to compass step around with my back foot and deliver a left cut onto their head. It's very quick, very simple, and counters lateral movement quite well. So So we'll show that a couple times from a couple angles. So, wall, roof, gate. The other nice thing about it is it's pretty close range. We'll show it again. Wall, roof, gate. Now we'll go ahead and I want, Randy, why don't you stand with your back to the camera, and then I will move, you'll go for a good spring on the side. So, wall, roof, gate. So I end up circling pretty much just as much as he did. Then we'll change sides again. Same idea. Wall, roof, gate. Very simple. I'm actually kind of depressed the amount of times I landed this. And certainly plenty of our guys have also landed this. It's a decent combo. The biggest thing to be aware of is what its place is. Don't do this all the time, right? Don't defend like this all the time. This is for when someone is really circling around you, which we'll be talking about more in a minute. But, second option, safer option, is going to be to parry with the true edge. So, he comes in, I get my first parry, I'm going to also move, though that's not always going to be available. The best option is to move like I just did, at which point you have an excellent thrust opportunity. This is the ideal thing. Move up with your parries, your left foot forward, you're binding against him proper, then just go ahead and plunge over. That's it, end of story, he's done. It's a very, very simple one to do, and you're particularly good at it, right? It just goes out really fast. But, parry one, parry two, point. He's basically already dead. This also ties into the really ideal thing, which would be to step in, but we're not going to worry about that. Point being, match the rotation, your point's basically in their face after you parry. But that may not always be available, because now we can't thrust for whatever reason, right? Okay, so you find yourself in a situation where you can't thrust, what do you do? My recommendation would be you can still do a short edge chop here. So, he cuts, I parry, he cuts, I move, right? I'm going to move my hands up a little bit higher this time, catch a little bit more in the middle of his blade. Then what I'm going to do is just go ahead and take that nice little chop. It's not going to be an amazing chop. I just kind of barely nicked his head. But it's more than enough. And you don't really need to add anything into it. Here's that again. 1, 2, a little higher. There it is. And I keep my shield on his blade so that he can't try and push through as I do so. Very simple. Again, no thumb grip required. Just parry a little higher. Make it through like you're doing a short, long cut. Jobs are good, right? Now, another alternative, and this is a very, very good alternative, if someone's cutting around, is just to kind of beat his cut aside with a little bit of percussion in the parry. Not huge, I'm not swinging at his sword, but the way to think about this is parry one, I kind of turn into it. You notice this one I'm not moving. That's because since I'm not moving, that's why I'm adding this percussion. Now what I'm looking to get is my edge on his flat, so he skips past me. From there, I'm just going to turn my pommel back and just step with that cut. This one is one I used a lot back in the day, and it's one of the first ones I taught people when we did tourney practice, because it frankly just works. Right? Now, it's nothing complicated, and people will realize you're doing it very quickly, and you're also running the risk of, if he can spring particularly deeply by not moving, you're still in place. So the ideal, like I said, is to step with it, but that's just not always available. You may find yourself in a situation where you're slightly crossed, or you're too narrow, or something along those lines. This is also particularly good if you're already in a bind, and he cuts around at you. Very quick, very fast. Now, as for movement, I recommend you move with your cut, either past him or slightly back, but either way, out on one of those diagonals will serve you pretty well. This same thing also works on the other side. So if for whatever reason, Randy, let's say, did 3 cuts, so he went 1, 2, 3, you can achieve the exact same thing. On this side, you also have a nice short edge option, just like we showed before, wherein he cuts and we'll just show the initial, boom. You can also lead in with that short in the same way. But, nice basic, nice simple, deals with the 1 and 2, jobs are good. Now, let's start talking about something a little bit more complicated, which is offensive combos. Now, the big thing I want to draw attention to with our offensive combos here is faith in your first cut. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of people just kind of put it out there because they don't believe that the cut is going to land. Not every offensive action needs to hit in order to succeed. So let's talk vor und nach, right? Again, using a lot of German terms, but that's the vocabulary I'm most familiar with. To use the idea of vor und nach, right, what I want to get is I want to get Randy reacting to what I'm doing. I'm basically writing out his script for him, and he has no choice but to do so. Now, if he's a good fencer, then he will do his best to flip that on me and force me to have to either drop into his role, or alternatively, he'll use one of those moments to counter me. That's kind of the deep of it, right? And that's a universal thing, even though I'm using a German term. But the biggest thing about this means that you shouldn't just throw away cuts. At no point should I just put a cut out there to make things happen. Every cut should be with the express purpose of trying to get him to do something. Now that something can be a lot of things, and it depends upon what offensive combo I'm looking to do. To put it in the simplest term possible, we're going to go for the simplest approach, which is I want Randy to block badly, or as badly as I can make him. Now Randy's a good fencer. Randy knows that if I swing at him, his best bet for staying alive is to move, get his sword out there, and create a favorable angle. With this sort of parry, I'm not going at Randy. It's Randy's turn to come at me. Against this, I know I'm going to have to adjust what strategy I go in against Randy. That's a deeper game, which we're not going to worry about yet, because this is targeted at just getting started. So, if you encounter that sort of parry, don't try any of the following. Again, his tip is out, he's moving, he's lined up more with me than I am with him. Don't do this. Okay, with that out of the way. Now, the parry you're more likely going to encounter is one of two. Either he's just going to kind of move his sword over, sometimes with movement, sometimes without, or alternatively, especially for my newer people, he'll do a bogan, right? You may want to change guards. Okay? Some sort of movement, but the hands are going up and he's defending more with the strong. Now, against this, the nice thing about it is even if he is doing the bogan, he has to take a 2-tempo action to attack me, same if he did just an upward parry. After he makes his cover, I now need to pick the next opening I'm going to go for. So I've attacked into his upper left from my upper right. Okay? Now I just need to examine what properties that has gotten me. I know he had to defend. Did he defend with his hands high? Or did he defend with his hands low and his tip high? Other parry. Oh. There you go, right? One of those two. It's either up or down. If its tip is down, hands are high, that means he's setting up for his own cut, right? But it also means that a lot more of him is exposed. If he's going with his tip up and his hands down, that means he's not as set up for a cut, but he's actually a little bit safer, right? Just because he's got more sword to move. So, next I need to pick the next opening I'm going to go for. I can go lower right from my perspective, lower left, or upper left. The common one you're going to see is up, up, right? High, high. Very simple. The problem with that is that he'll get pretty used to that pretty quickly, and most people who are watching this are. So, let's start talking about some other places you can go. There's two options you have. Option number one, go around, okay? The best place I recommend to go around would either be into a low opening, or alternatively, to go for the high opening, but with the express purpose of just driving him there, right? So, low opening would be something along the lines of, I'm going to guard myself against it, and provoke out with a wide step to get him. Now, especially for my effectual players, there's the danger of, okay, I don't like cutting from below because I don't want to hit his arms unintentionally. One, if he puts his arms there in the course of me swinging, that is not my fault. But, devil's advocate here, how do you get around arms with cutting from below? Lateral steps is the key. So just hold your arms out for me, Randy. He's made a wedge, right? Now, Randy's arms cover a lot of territory, right? He's getting a lot of distance here. But the trick is, if I don't want to be cutting him into the arms, all I need to do is I need to get further past his arms, and now his head is the more apparent target. Because eventually you reach the point where his distance between his head and his shoulder is only about that big. So, using hard lateral movement, the head is going to become a lot more open. Now, that's not always the case. Be a little bit more curled up. Okay? If he's a lot more curled up, especially as his shield starts getting in front of his face, that becomes a little dicier, mind you. But the same sort of principle, and aiming more for the top of the head as opposed to into the cheek, you can still get around it. The most important thing is literally get around it, spring wide to the side. So, let's see that again. So I throw my first driving cut to get him to go up, then I'm going to go ahead and step out with my next cut for a nice wide Unterhaupt. And like I said, wide is the key. Don't make it a Mittelhaupt, but really step out with this cut and you'll start getting some options, okay? Let's show that on the center line real quick because I want them to get an appreciation for the spring. So, drive all the way out to the side. The more to the side you can get, the better. You might worry about running the risk of hitting the back of the head. Aim for the temple, you won't have that problem. So, overall, pretty simplistic. And then in time, when it comes to fighting people who are in full gear, feel free to target the arms or into the abdomen or things along those lines. Anything to cause him to have to do a parry where he has to drop down in some way. Now, let's talk about where we can go from there, right? So, 1, 2. Yeah, this is the bogan killer, by the way. He goes to parry this. His arms have to drop, and if he's smart, he'll move. This is where we now finish up. Well, if he's really smart, he runs, but this is where we now drive into the final part of this combo, which is high, low, high. From here, I have two options. If I'm a little bit further distance, I can use my long edge. With where I am right now, I'm going to use my short edge. I'm just going to pull on that pommel and just take right to the top of the head. Here's that again. 1, 2, 3. Simplistic, easy, not too complicated. Now I'll do a little bit more distance, so don't move in on the second parry. 1, 2, 3. Pretty much all I do is I just rotate around where my hands are, and my blade can reach as long as I then adjust back and along the track. It's a very simple one, pretty much universal in regards to its actual composition, i.e. up, down, high. On that last cut, you want to be trying to target more of the top of the head since you just drove them down. Make it so they have to race you back up to the top. You'll have a lot more luck getting that hit in. But another alternative you can do with this one is you could add in the thumb grip. So if you're a little bit more inclined to use thumb grip or things along those lines, you can start off with a short edge cut to get him to drive. Tight cut from below, tight up from above. This is what that can evolve into, though it doesn't require the thumb grip to work. That's just an option. And that actually becomes one of my favorite combos, the wing cut, Flugehal. Now, let's talk about the other option on the offense. So that's going around. Actually, let's talk about one more thing, i.e. the expected hit. Because this is something that used to get a lot of people. So I throw my first cut, and Randy's already expecting me to go around, okay? You have two choices. You can either oblige him and cut here, but then come back, or go to somewhere else. Or you can not oblige him and let him work on his own. So what that looked like, cut, I start to move, he starts to parry, I'll just go ahead and follow him in. That one's going to be a little harder for you to get a grasp of, but it's something to play with. See what you can cause him to react with as little movement from your body as possible. What I like to usually do to try and cause this is I'll cut in and I'll step with my foot to get him to start moving, and then I'll just sink my weight back onto that lead leg to get a decent cut. Pretty fun. You may also find that you need to slightly lift your arms. That's another thing that helps. Boom, lift, drop. Things along those lines. Very, very subtle, very tricky. Now, the other option, cut around, get him to start moving there, just go right back to the opening you started with. This is basically your introduction to a feint. The biggest thing though is that I cut, make him parry, start your attack, and then as soon as he starts to move, just come back to where you are. Make sure you only start to come back as he starts to move. If he isn't moving, keep attacking. You may give up the opportunity to hit him because he may parry at the last minute, but that's still good because that means he's doing a desperate last minute parry rather than a good one. So, all pretty simple, all pretty straightforward. Apply those same concepts to all the 4 openings. You've got a lot of options there. Now, let's talk about working on the blade with your first action. There's 2 options I have for you here. Option number 1 is going to be the Duplieren, doubling. This is a specifically German thing, though there's also some theorists at Lee Fiore shows this as well. Basically what's going to be is I've worked on the blade once, I'm going to work behind the blade. This is very good against people that parry badly. So, I cut in, and all I'm going to do, so he's super closed up, just push your pommel to the outside, and go behind that blade. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, doesn't even require the thumb grip, just out, you've got it. Most of you watching this in my class have actually probably done this unintentionally once or twice before. And it works on both sides, it works on all 4 openings. And this can happen as well, let's say Randy tries to bogan, right? That's Copia de Volano, my friend, right? Boom, okay? Can I still bogan here? Sorry, not can I bogan, can I do clearing? Kind of. It's not going to be quite the same, but all I do is I just turn my pommel up. There's my nice little cut to the top of his head. I'm basically going behind the blade. Again, not quite a Duplieren, but I wouldn't know what else to call it other than a wind over, and we're just cutting rather than thrusting. That same thing can apply in a bunch of different contexts. Anytime you're on the blade, just cut rather than do a stab. So, as you learn stabs, remember they can still cut. But either way, let's show that on both sides real quick. So first option is going to be just block for this one, then we'll do Bogan. So boom, out. Now from this side, boom, up. Now we're going to do cut, then Bogan on this side. So cut, out. Now that one does require a little bit more thumb because you're going to have to get the short edge in play. All I do is I just stick my thumb up, throw my pommel out to the side, keep your arms nice and extended, very simple. And then finally on Bogan on this side, boom. That one's going to be a bit more of a press, but the important thing about it is as long as you keep that firmness, Randy can't take off. He's stuck underneath my blade. So that's another good one for what Effectual is, i.e. a training game, right? But that's the Duplaren. The other option you have that I think is pretty good, though bear in mind this one is one that, use it somewhat sparingly, is the idea of not quite an expulsion, but think of it as an expulsion. A better term would be glide, right? So I cut in, and Randy needs me. I'm going to make it like I'm leading the blade. So I'm going to start relaxing my hand, but then I'm going to slide back down it. Again, this one is very similar to what we did before where I kind of made him think I was going to leave, but it's much more narrow. So if you're getting good at that first one, start trying to use this one. This is also particularly good if you find someone who just barely parried and they're pretty weak. See if you can just push through. Now the reason that this works is because of how I'm pushing. So what I am not doing is I am not trying to leave with a point over. I'm pushing with the tip of the sword by engaging my right hand. I'm pushing in with my left hand as well, so I'm using my sword as just one solid object and just kind of body dropping as I go in. I'm wedging myself against that sword as I push in, and you will most likely get a small nick. Now, the other way you can do it, the way I showed initially, we get in, I start to raise. Now, I'm not turning my hands. If I turn my hands, that opportunity goes away. I start to raise, and then as soon as he weakens, I just slide right back down the blade. The key with this one is try to raise toward his tip, and you're basically just re-establishing the wedge, and then you turn into a paper cutter. It's really cool. But that same thing can also be done if you're just blade to blade. So if we're just out here, right, see if you can wedge in and get your point across. Now this one will more than often than not turn into a thrust, but it is a very valuable thing to learn how to do, both as an offensive option and also as just a kind of mess with person option, right? If we're just out here and Randy's just kind of be center, just give him that little flick, see what he does. I don't have to execute the thrust. More than likely he'll panic and then I'll get something else. But that's kind of the main thing for offensive combo. Now, the reason I didn't go into a ton of specifics is because that's not what I'm looking to do when it comes to building combinations, be they offensive or defensive. What I want you to think about is, where are my openings? So we've got 4 of them, technically 5 with the thrust, right? And you've got these tools. You've got both hands that can manipulate the lever or not. You've got both edges that can be used or not. And then you've got your movement around that center piece, which can be used or not. As long as you keep these concepts in mind, you're going to not have too much difficulty forming a plan. Now, the best thing I would say to do right now, how to start building things off the advice that we just gave, is the following. When it comes to defense, how are you most commonly defending? Is it working for you or not? If it is not working for you, see if you can't use one of those other tools to make your defense better. If it is working for you, or you've altered it, then go ahead and start looking how you can put an offensive capability back in there. So defend, there's your offense, right? And also don't feel that your offense always has to be there. There's nothing wrong with having a pure exit strategy. When it comes to your offensive ones, what are the most common attacks you do? Who do they work on? Because I guarantee they work on at least one person, otherwise they wouldn't exist, right? Who do they work on? And then what do they do in response? This is where you got to think a lot more about other people as opposed to you, because that's kind of the key of offense. From there, see if you can employ one of these tools once again. And above all else, keep it simple. The more complicated you try and make things, the less you start thinking about the person you're fighting, the more you start thinking about yourself. That's just not how offensive combos work. It doesn't matter how fast, how strong, how many times I've practiced a certain cut. If Randy is saying, nah, that's not going to hit me today, I will not hit him. It's about deceiving him to the point that he's like, oh, I just made that opening for him. Damn, right? But otherwise, that's kind of a basic introduction, if you will, to how to start building your combos, also framed around effectual. We also went on the idea of how to start cutting from below, the answer being wide angles. And one more key point on that actually that I wanted to show. If at any point someone goes into a guard wherein their hands are way above their head, this is an excellent time to execute cuts from below. The question being, okay, how do I do it without hitting their arms? The narrower, the better. Be they right up the middle. Now that one's a little dangerous because his hands are still up, so make sure it's in the process of, if Randy and I are both out here, right? Both out here. And he's going up, that'd be the time to follow through with that because I'm safe. Or alternatively, if he goes up and I find myself in a low position, still a lot of offline movement, but I'm cutting up his center line. So if I were to not move while I do that, right, I'm going from 6 to 12. But with some offline movement of either direction, I hit him in the middle of the face without really worry, and I've got my guard going high. Same thing other side. Pretty good cut, pretty safe, pretty straightforward. That's kind of how I recommend you use it. Either the widest of wide or the narrowest of narrow, still while sidestepping. But either way, I think I've prattled on enough. Thank you very much, Randy, as always. And hopefully that was of help to you guys. I hope you've all had a wonderful holiday, and round about Christmas time I'm going to be putting out some special videos for you all. But for now at least, I'm going to try and resume regular recording schedule. So stay tuned for all those, and also welcome to all the new subscribers we got recently. I really appreciate that you guys have been enjoying the content. So, all that said, thank you very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.